Greetings all, Puka here with two quick announcements. First, some advance warning that our next episode will be slightly delayed, both because it will be the first of three tackling the behemoth that is the C20 corebook, and because we wanted to release that initial salvo on Beltane, one of the foremost holidays of the Kithane calendar, so don't be dismayed if next Monday arrives without some new devilry. And second, we'd like to invite listeners once again to submit recipes to our Changeling Cookbook project for next year's celebration of the game's 30th anniversary. Again, this will be a collection of books released over the course of 2025, and the cookbook is one where we'd like to invite participation from fans worldwide. We're extending the deadline to June 1st, and a link will be provided in the show notes to this episode so you can find out more and hopefully send us some delectable ideas. With that, on with the show. This is Changeling the Podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the Podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host, Josh, and with this is your other host, Puka. Say hi, Puka.
Once upon a time,
What are we talking about today, Puka?
we are delving into the realm of fiction. And
yes, as opposed to the, non-fiction role-playing game we normally talk about.
Yes. Even though, like a role-playing game is also a type of fiction, we're looking at two of the more straightforward examples of that definition in the Anthology of Dreams and Immortal Eyes for the Cup of Dreams, the two associated fiction works for Changeling 20th Anniversary Edition.
Prose. I think prose might be the word.
But role-playing games are prose too.
They are? Is a textbook prose?
A set of short stories and a novel. There we go.
There we go.
And I'm very excited because for the purposes of going into these episodes, beginning with this one, I did finally bite the bullet and get the print-on-demand versions of all of the C20 books that I didn't have. And then I opened the box and found these two texts, and they're trade paperbacks, and it weirds me out. My 90s child heart is expecting mass market paperbacks when it comes to like role-playing game associated stuff.
I've found, I don't know if you've gone to a bookstore lately, there are almost none of those new. Like nobody makes those at all for anything based. Like I don't say no one, but like there's the Shannon Maguire series. I've been getting new books and they're all trade paperbacks now.
But why?
I don't know. I hate it. I like them.
Yeah.
If I could get this type of writing in mass market paperback, I'd be very happy. I'd be like, I'd pay extra. I'd pay like more than hardcover prices to get it new. Like that's the.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it's like an accessibility thing because the text is admittedly a little bit larger and a little bit more spaced out in these. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't know. It was just it caught me off guard. But yeah. Anyway, it feels cool to hold the physical stuff, to have the tactility. Also, I'd like to share the factoid that the word anthology originally meant a collection of blossoms.
Ooh.
So there's your fact for the day. But before we dive in, can we talk again about what is the advantage or not of having novels and short stories and other forms of fiction that are kind of in the world of role-playing games? Do you think it helps at all with showcasing the world or what?
I think it depends on the story. Like, and how, and we'll get into this because I think, so first of all, what makes a good story and what would be useful for Changeling the Dreaming or for a role-playing game is not exactly the same. Like, I will point to a different book for Vampire, As One Dead, which was regarded...
Also on my shelf.
Yeah, regarded as kind of highlighting some absolutely terrible things in Vampire the Masquerade. But it's a really good book if you set aside the whole vampire setting and just treat the book as a self-contained thing. And that can be an issue, right? Like, because I think it can help, if you're talking about what it does for Changeling as opposed to just be a story to read and whatever advantages there are from reading a short story or novel, I think it can help flesh out the world for people and help create more of a shared understanding and also give lots of ideas and things like that. But the problem is if it diverges too much from what's in the role-playing game, like, if the way chimerical reality works is completely different or doesn't even exist, or
Right.
Foil works. We'll get into some of this, right? That, I think, is now a detriment. At the best, I think it can really help with that. Same as like if they ever got a Changeling the Dreaming Netflix series, that would be amazing. But
Ooh.
yeah, that kind of thing would be great. But if we got Kindred the Embraced, maybe not. So it's
Oh, come now. Kindred the Embraced was a masterpiece of 90s television, and I'll hear no guff about
yeah.
it.
One of my biggest problems was they made the Nosferatu too sexy. But
Cool. Would you say that maybe it's different for if you're kind of using a text like this to get into the tabletop game versus the LARP? Because from my perspective, I agree with you that it depends on the story, but in terms of what it contributes value to, regardless of the quality of story, is around world building and modeling narrative without
mhm.
rules. Like, nobody in the novel is rolling dice or checking
Yeah,
difficulties or whatever. So I imagine LARP has more of the same flow that you would find in a text like this.
I wouldn't say that.
I don't know. I've never done it with changes,
Yeah,
so I
I
don't
would
know.
say LARP. The role of rules in LARP and tabletop might be is kind of
Hmm.
different-ish, but like the quantity, I would not say is necessarily different.
Okay.
It's not. I'm not even talking about the rules or rolling dice. Like that doesn't. The way I think of it, like you think of like abilities and attributes in Changeling
Hmm.
or any other World of Darkness game. I don't think anyone's supposed to literally have 5 tiers of how well they understand computers and their computer
Right.
knowledge is all like this, and it's not like it's all supposed to be abstraction and things like that. And that's yeah, you don't need that in a book. You don't really need that at a table always too, right? But what is a freehold? What does your character see? When if you're playing a mortal who is enchanted, what would that be like? Like that
Yeah.
would be important, right? And I think that should be consistent. If it's not consistent, I think it's sort of doing a disservice in a sense, in a way that like it's now about it still could have use, but it's about as useful as like reading,
Right.
Charles DeLint novel.
Right.
Like, yeah, that's great, but that's not going to like help you understand Changeling better in that way. Like it's
Yeah,
yeah,
that's fair. I mean, in a sense, to go back to the your statement that if it's a good enough book on its own, maybe the depth with which it connects to like the game terms and the mechanics of the game is kind of immaterial.
yeah. But I mean, it would still be like if there was a really good Changeling novel that really diverged from Changeling. I don't think I'd be like, if I'm running a game and people want to learn more about the game, I wouldn't suggest it still, even if I
Hmm.
like the book, because it'd be like, well, this doesn't help you get into the headspace of the game. So
So you'd want a good novel consistent with the world of Changeling that doesn't necessarily foreground that world.
yeah, how good it is ultimately just becomes to like, would the person mind reading it? It doesn't have to be,
Yeah. I mean, you need a solid plot, solid
yeah,
characters.
but it doesn't have to like knock their socks off. It can be like
Mhm.
whatever threshold. And I mean, everybody's got different there's taste, and they might still not like. I might love it, and somebody might hate it, like that, whatever. But yeah, like the role for Changeling the Dreaming, I think it's more important that it's consistent with Changeling the Dreaming.
Hmm.
In the same way of like you get a supplement, and like part of the things we've said when we're like talking about different supplements is sometimes we're like, well, this fits well, or other times we're like, this is what are you doing here? This is not fitting. This doesn't work with Changeling. How does this, you know? So
Well, let's talk about the first 10 chances to hit that
mm-hmm.
in Anthology of Dreams, being
Yeah,
a collection of 10 stories. Just as a bit of background, this was a stretch goal on the Kickstarter. I think pretty early on, I think it was one of the earlier goals. There was an open call for stories, and I still kick myself for not writing something and sending it in, but what can
yeah,
you do? It also technically came out before the core book, which I think is sort of standard practice for these short story collections
mm-hmm.
associated with the game lines.
Yep. I will say one thing on a technical level of these two books, because
Hmm.
I read them on an EPUB on my phone.
Hmm.
That's how I prefer to read electronic books, if that is possible. Even some role playing games do that, just not Changeling. Um, and there was a weird thing I've never seen before in an EPUB where my reader thought that both of the EPUBs were written in terms of pages from right to left.
Oh,
Like so when I'd like start at the end, I'd have to like flip through the wrong. So I just had like change a bunch of settings I didn't know about the EPUB reader to read them, and it was very strange because I read a lot of EPUBs and this never
yeah.
happened to me before.
Interesting.
So it's a weird. So this is I just downloaded them off Drive Through RPG recently, so that's kind of the past few weeks. So
That's what glamour does to technology.
yes, or maybe just a knocker did it. There we go.
There you go. So anyway, should we just get through these and give a
Mm-hmm.
brief description? So we start with Miss Opal's Clockwork Heart by Abigail Korfman. Classic story of Slua falls in love with a satyr, gets heartbroken, makes a new mechanical one for herself.
Yeah, this was interesting, and I loved it. And I'm like, how could I make this work in Changeling?
Yeah. Slua with
Because,
infusion, maybe.
but like, her heart broke, but they're taking it quite literally. And like,
Yeah.
I like it. Do I want to add that to Changeling? But
Yeah. No, I like it because it's a trope that you don't see often with a Slua magic crafter,
Mhm.
but it makes perfect sense. And I would say, out of all of the core kiths that aren't presented as being crafty by default, Slua are like right at the top.
Yeah,
After Knockers and Boggins and Dougal.
yeah, they still have prop as a,
Yeah.
and in the Kith book there were some crafty types who would use the crafts rating in there.
But it's not generally the first thing you associate with them.
Yep.
So the tale also recounts some of the Slua protagonists' adventures with other changelings in the Freehold over the years and leaves the question open, will she ever love again? So I like
Mhm.
it for showing this character. I mean, it does show almost like a series of game sessions where this character is
Yeah,
involved, and I kind of like that structure. Also, it's set in Princeton. I was like, I know these
it does a
places.
nice it does a nice level of also being disparaging to the she, but the she aren't like the villains or anything. It's just,
Yeah, they're just
at least
obnoxious.
some of the she aren't. Yeah,
And there's plenty of them in Princeton.
yeah, and it's not even like morally bad. It's more like, you're the worst.
But yeah, a solid opening, and
Hmm.
I like whoever the best friend character was. I forget the name. Brendan, that was it. So yeah, good short opening.
Hmm. I think it's a great way if your character's like hurt with or hurt romantically.
Yeah. So then we follow with the very different One for Sorrow, Two for Joy.
Hmm.
This one is set in Melbourne, Australia, a very banality-soaked version of Melbourne.
Hmm.
The protagonist is a social worker named Marion who's trying to unravel the mystery of what's going on with a child in a possibly abusive home. There's this curious homeless man named Mr. Magpie, hence the title from
Hmm.
the classic Magpie rhyme, who she seems to keep encountering. And then her story gets intercut with these kind of folklore interludes with the Aboriginal legend of the Little Red Men who live in strangler figs. I had not heard of these before
Hmm.
reading this and then like Googling it and finding out it was all about
Yeah.
that. But
And this is where
yeah.
I learned that there's a whole bunch of trees called strangler figs all around the world too.
Yeah.
Because the first thing I looked at when I looked it up was like Florida. Wait, no, that's not right.
Yeah. But the Australian version seems to have a particular folkloric bent to them.
Hmm. Yeah, I like the villain in this.
It builds into this interesting take on colonialism in Changeling, which we see so little of, and I really
Hmm.
appreciated that. We'll get
Yeah,
to the player's guide down the line, but it's a very difficult topic, I think, for the game to wrestle with, and the way it's presented here, I actually think works really well.
yeah. There's one thing, like literally, I'm not saying there's a problem. I'm saying I literally am not sure on.
Mhm.
It's the whole indigenous people with a social worker thing,
I, yeah.
but it didn't
Well,
touch on it. And yeah, no. So and it was like another white kid. Anyway, so they
yeah.
didn't go there, so that's fine. But
Yeah, I did not appreciate, frankly, the kind of digs at social workers being the child of a social worker. So
no, but I mean that's a
no,
thing that happens
of course, of
here. And
course.
yeah,
I mean,
but
as a separate thing, there's a line where it's like, "Oh, no wonder social workers drink so much," and I'm like, "Okay, hold on."
yeah,
So yeah. Anyway, I will go to bat for social workers, except in contexts where they
yeah.
are,
I think that
yeah,
line was more meant, and it didn't come across right, but it was more meant like it's a very stressful job.
it is,
So,
but I also feel like aside from the cases where they are perpetuating systems of oppression, which admittedly has and does
mhm,
happen, I don't know any social workers who are alcoholics. I mean, I'm sure there must be a few, but I think it's
mhm,
a testament to their strength that they don't,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
Even if you're talking about a bad stereotype, it's a not the right bad stereotype.
Yeah. So anyway, aside from that,
Hmm.
great story. And interesting. I think it's probably like the only, because I mean, the player's guide, I'm trying to remember how much narrative is given around the Australian context. And I think it's mostly just like game information that's presented.
Yeah,
So here we have an actual story being told in that setting.
And it's also a type of kith that is not in the player's guide. There's actually
Exactly, yeah.
some of this, and there's some other stories like this too. But it's like, and I think you could use something like this even with a different culture.
Yeah. It makes me wonder what the setup was for as this was being written. Like, did the authors get a draft copy of C20 to look at, or,
I doubt
you know?
it, based on
Yeah,
the way things work here. There's some things where you're like, that's not changed, like, but a lot of the stuff's more.
that's
That's
second edition.
exactly, yeah. They get a
Yeah.
lot of glamour tokens and stuff throughout here. So,
Yeah. So then story number 3, Honey and Apples by Jeffrey McVeigh.
mm,
This is set in a sleepy Illinois town just before the resurgence with a teenage redcap
yep,
named Marty. Marty has crow's feet, and his best friend is Janet the Satyr, and they are the only changelings they know.
yep.
Marty keeps having dreams about the Shining Host returning and feels certain it's drawing closer. Things unfold much as you might imagine.
It gives me ideas on. This projects a different take on the interregnum than I
Yes.
mean, than I thought. Like, it's a lot more harsh with banality than I thought even the interregnum would have. So it's
Yeah.
interesting, like to the point where you don't have remembrance anymore and stuff, like, or
Mm.
at least to be a lot more rare.
See,
So,
I think it's actually not as much about harsh banality as lack of glamour. And it really
mm,
kind of shows that distinction because the two of them don't really seem to be leading banal lives, but nor are they connected to any kind of broader changeling society.
yeah,
Certainly, they're not connected to the dreaming itself.
I think it's more that they're affected by the mists more strongly
Yeah, maybe.
than, yeah.
But it is maybe my favorite story in the collection because it does address that little explored time in Changeling's history. Plus the fact that it contains the story to two people and doesn't use like game terms to explain itself because it's not
Hmm.
like they would know the names of the arts or anything. So
Yep.
I really liked that self-contained world that it created.
And it was a very pro she red cap,
Yeah, it's a rarity and a nice red cap.
but I think it shows why it's a rarity. So,
Yeah. Well, no spoilers, but
yeah. But it's interesting. It even covers multiple. It's the only story I've seen for Changeling that actually covers multiple lives, like
mm.
reincarnations.
So then next is No Such Thing as Dragons by Jason Ross Inchauskis.
Hmm.
Also, apologies if I'm getting any of the names wrong, if any of these people happen to listen. In this story, a Puka childling named Oren, or Gavin in his mortal seeming, sees a pair of dragons, dragonkin perhaps, move in next door, and tries to convince his friend, Herbie the Corrid, to investigate them or scare them away, but then finds out they're not so bad. And then they have an evil dragon who's their enemy. Spoiler, it's kind of a downer ending, but it's pretty good.
This makes it when you're talking before, like, did they get the copy first? I'm like, well, the Korred
Yeah.
weren't even in English language, but you also have the dragon, like dragon changelings, including like a Thalane
Yeah.
version. But that's like some neat ideas. Like, I want like more Kith write ups based on this book.
Yeah. Wasn't there Dragonkin and Kits of Arcadia?
Yes, I don't know if they're quite the same as here though, but
Well, and this predates Kits of Arcadia as well, so.
yeah. But it's like you could do a whole dragonkin write up based on here with the Thalane, the Kithane, and the Thalane, and the. Although I don't know if they quite count as Kithane or not, but that's a whole other question. Yeah, I liked it.
Next up is Between Tenses by Miranda Callis, wherein we have Stephen, the Skaha graduate student,
Hmm.
his knocker advisor, Dr. Meridon, and his sister Kara, a satyr warrior, all
Hmm.
investigating some mysterious monster or group of monsters that seems to be abducting and or eating changelings. It was fine.
Yeah,
Um, it was very. I feel like this one had less of an arc than the others. Like we get kind of a sense of the characters, but it all kind of takes place over the course of I think a single evening, more or
yeah,
less.
yeah. This almost, but not quite, feels like somebody wrote up a session of their
Yeah,
game.
yeah.
The main reason not is a character gets sidelined in a way that doesn't quite make sense for player characters. You shouldn't do
Yeah,
that, but
yeah. Some rad cantrip usage in this one, I have to say.
hmm.
Like you get to see all the bunks and what they do and why they do
Hmm.
them. I was a little taken aback by some of the shifts in tone. There's one page that's just a wall of text like that comes out of nowhere.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, I think that also feels like that was the storyteller's write-up to introduce the session.
There's like a super nitpicky from a Changeling the Dreaming role-playing game perspective is you reused a high-level bunk twice? That doesn't sound right.
Yeah. Well, everyone needs a few sturdy tricks in their ensemble, I
Yep.
guess. So, but I like seeing graduate students and their advisors being changelings. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, thinking on this thing, this does feel though like second ed Skaha.
Yeah.
First ed, then, but I couldn't be sure.
I can live with that.
Mhm.
Story number 6, I think, is probably the roughest and probably my other favorite. Well, this one, and then there's one more that's my other third favorite, but this is When I Grow Up by Julia Papke. Here we have Ellard the Boggin and Marx the Satyr following a vision from Ellard to an apartment where they come across Marx's older sister Githa, a slua, wasting away in a bed surrounded by weird enchanted hair they can't hack through. Their attempts to free her from whatever is corroding her body and spirit are intercut with flashbacks where we learn that the two sisters had an abusive father. Marx fled, and she bears guilt for leaving her sister behind to watch over their younger sisters. There's a journey into the dreaming, there's a lot of emotional turmoil. This one might be the one that kind of nails Changeling for me as a setting, in terms of you have like real world human horror mixed with multiple definitions of family. You have this balance between escapism and responsibility. You have utterly weird and horrific stuff mixed with memory and the ordinary. And there's like love and hate and redemption, and everything has a price. There's just all of these sort of themes that resonate for me.
Yeah.
Bonus points for having references to garbage songs too, including the title.
This might be our biggest divergence on
Oh no.
our enjoyment of it. This one, it might have just been the mood I was in or something. I couldn't follow this story. The flashbacks and the way, something with the writing style, I just was lost by the end. I have no idea what happened. Like, I didn't even get as much as you gave in that summary.
I did reread it. I will say
Yeah.
that.
And it could have also been, I was like, oh, I'm trying to read this book for this
Yeah.
episode. You know?
Yeah, it is, I think, a story that rewards a slow and careful reading, probably more than the others.
Mhm.
So, yeah. But it's rough. I mean, content warning on that one in particular for anyone who has a rough family history to deal with.
Yeah.
Next up is Watercolors by Deborah J. Brannon.
This is the one that made me think of you by reading this.
Yay!
Because of who's in it.
Well, no spoilers. It's pretty clear pretty early on what's going on.
Yeah. I actually really like this story. This might be my favorite. I'm not sure.
I did like it.
But I
too.
wish the love interest was a guy.
Do you honestly? Well, okay, very briefly. A trust fund artist kid named Sean is the protagonist. He lives by the sea. He has a Selkie girlfriend who he sees once in a while and hangs out with her and her sister. This part, they let him wear their seal skins and go swimming as a seal, which caught me. I stopped. I was like, wait, can Selkies just let other people wear their skins? I've literally never thought about that before.
No, they can't. Sorry, it's spoiling it.
Yeah. But it's meant to be unclear whether Sean himself is Fae or not.
No.
It does seem pretty obvious to me, but...
No, it's pretty clear by the end.
Yeah, no, it becomes explicit, but... Well, not explicit, just... It is spelled out.
Sean's unclear on it for most of the story.
Yes.
It's a nice dream dance story, I think.
So, in terms of it being a heterosexual story, it made me recall... So this is going... Probably I was 15 or so. Somebody had written a story and posted it, I think, on the Old White Wolf forums. And it was about a Selkie teenager meeting his first boyfriend who was a satyr teenager. And it was probably one of the earliest, wholesome queer pieces of media that I ever encountered in the wild. And it had such an impact on me. I mean, I know we've talked many times about Changeling as a queer metaphor, but that story really kind of brought it to the foreground for me. And I was like, oh, I love this. And I wish I knew who wrote that or I could find it online or anything, but the Mists have claimed it probably.
Yeah, I can't even really nail down why, but this felt like tonally or something like a queer story. And that's what
it felt like it should have been, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's still a very good story.
Yeah.
It can work. It doesn't have to, but it's still, yeah.
For other queer Selkie representation, please see The Emperor's New Coat, now available on Storytellers. Anyway. Next up is The Cost of Sleep by Catherine McIntyre. Set in Philadelphia.
This is another. They have a new Kithany that's not in Changeling officially, and I want
Yeah,
them.
actual Banshee.
Yeah,
Like, and you can see what the birthrights are and the frailty.
yeah. The quality of it as a story maybe suffered a little bit by being so well suited as a primer for Changeling, but it's for a Kith that doesn't exist. So
It felt like the opening story for Kith Book Banshee, and that was like beautiful.
is this book covered under the rules for Storyteller Vault?
What do you mean by covered?
In terms of like what you're allowed to include things from, like ideas from and stuff.
I would imagine, but I mean the Banshee are in.
No, but this book in general, there's a lot of things that it's like, do
Oh,
you need to
yeah,
take it as
well,
light inspiration, or could you just make this into like make 4 Storyteller Vault supplements out of this book? Is my
I suppose one should peruse the rules of the Storytellers.
yep.
Very briefly, the plot of this one is that the Banshee protagonist has been kept awake, death wailing by a series of murders in her city of Philadelphia, and she learns that they've been committed by her Belor ex-boyfriend as part of some kind of blood feud, and she decides to put a stop to it, not out of any kind of altruism, but just so that she can get some sleep. It's a very unseelie story overall, and I'm glad we
Yeah.
got at least one.
I feel like that was partly the thing she tells herself and other people. Like,
Yeah,
I think she was
perhaps.
also didn't like everybody getting murdered. But yeah, the Banshee frailty is every time someone dies near you, you have to like you let out this Banshee wail. So
And drive away the neighbors, apparently.
yeah, she's really living in the wrong place. I think. Well, I don't know how bad is Philly for you live in.
I mean,
Is there
listen,
neighborhoods like this?
I would probably not. There are absolutely neighborhoods like this, and if someone
Okay.
were death wailing, I probably wouldn't even notice. So,
You really do
anyway,
live in a different country. Okay.
yeah. The penultimate story, Summer Girl by Ren Handman. Here we have a teenage girl who spends her summers on a family farm where she spends all her time with another mysterious girl who seems to be an anime.
Yep.
But then one day something has poisoned her friend, and so the protagonist must go on a quest to cure her.
Friend, we finally get queer content.
Yeah, there is a blossoming romance,
Yeah.
for sure.
It's not strictly platonic. That's
No.
for sure.
It's a cute story.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I didn't find it very engaging, personally.
Yeah, I felt like it started out better than it ended. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, but it was like it's doing a little dreaming quest, and it felt. This is actually a problem I have with running stuff in the dreaming, where I have to really step up my game, or else it will feel kind of. And now you see the 3 moons, and now there's like wolves made out of mud chasing you, and now they're actually making it have more impact, I guess, or more narrative weight. That's
Yeah.
part of the problem I've run into. So I think the author did too.
Perhaps. It does give me some good ideas for story beats for such a quest.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yep.
anyway. And then last but certainly not least, Much Ado by Pete Woodworth, in which
Mm-hmm.
Saffron the Boggin and Jimmy the Ishu arrive at a college party's aftermath to find the she, Lady Elaine, in order to bring her home to get her ready for a noble wedding to Countess Jones of House Leonin. This will cement a peace treaty. But then it turns out that she drunkenly got married to an ex-girlfriend named Kat, whose presence at the party was not expected. Oh no!
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, everything's fine, and it turns out everyone's fine with polyamory, and the guy who tried to sabotage the wedding was just
Mm-hmm.
secretly in love.
Did you violate the technical definition of the oath? That's the big concern. No one actually cared, but it's like, can't break an oath.
Yeah.
This makes me sad. We'll cover this in our C20 Changes book, but this makes me sad. I like this version of Willow Whisper, not that they use in this book, not the one we get in C20.
The old version, so.
The right version.
I confess that Much Ado About Nothing is not one of the Shakespeare texts that I know very well, so I'm not sure how directly this plot is meant to echo that one, but it seems like there's shades of that somewhere in here. Also, the final scene has a swing electronica dance party, which I'm 100% here for.
Mm-hmm. But the story's kept light all the way through it, so it's not bad.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It's absolutely a romantic comedy.
If you have any triggers around the thought of eating wax, maybe you can skip that one.
I missed that part.
With the crayons?
Yeah, missed that part completely. I think by the end, I was kind of getting through these at a brisk clip. So.
Yeah, there's a thing where... Also, it has the old rules for draws. So, like, this is... Pretty much all of this is definitely pre-C20.
Oh, right. I do remember that now.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's some author bios we won't get into.
Yeah, it's you can look them all up.
Yeah.
They're all
What
people.
did you happen to look up who besides Pete Woodsworth wrote for Changeling outside of this book?
So Abigail Korfman, I think, was on the ready-made characters for
Hmm.
C20. Jason Ross Inchauskis has done other World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness writing, but I don't know that he's done anything for Changeling. Julia Papke assisted on the original Kith book Boggins, so if we want
Hmm.
to count that. Those are all the ones that I know. I think Miranda Callis might also have done something for Changeling, but I can't remember. My
Okay.
suspicion is that Pete probably recruited a lot of, because like the Philadelphia area comes up I think 3 times in these
Yeah.
stories, so I feel like within his
I
circle.
need to really visit Philadelphia at one point, not just to meet you, but also they act like San Francisco is the Changeling City. I think it's actually Philly based on.
I agree. Yes,
Yeah.
I mean with all the banshee whales that we have.
Yeah.
Overall things, I think what I liked is the fact that the details of the kiths and what they do and what their powers are, all of that is driven by narrative needs rather than game mechanics. So like we get the Bianchi kith with powers, but we don't really get enough of a sense to know exactly how they work.
Yep.
We understand why they happen and like
Hmm.
how the changeling actually deals with them, which I think is very valuable.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good way to make kiths.
Yeah, yeah.
Like figure out how it works narratively and then work backwards to the mechanics would be
Yeah.
good.
There is advice in that direction with the Kith creation
Yeah.
in C20
But
core.
go and write a few short stories would be that's kind of overkill probably, but
At least read a few. I mean,
yeah.
if you're drawing from a source. Something else that I appreciated in these stories is that they really showcased different shapes of banality. I expect different shapes of glamour. Like, glamour should
Hmm.
have 1,000 different shapes, but banality does feel very different in all of these, especially as it affects the changelings who are in different life stages or different locations. It's nice to see narration around the effects of banality, given that I would say glamour gets the lion's share of descriptive language in Changeling. And when banality really gets attention, it's nice to see that done well.
Hmm.
And then thematically, there's just a good mix of romance and adventure and tragedy and horror. Kudos.
Hmm.
I don't think any one story really hits all of them at once, but maybe that's a good thing. So,
Yeah, no, that would be a bit much for a short story. Yeah, I think this is like when we were talking about if you're running a C20 game, pre C20 books, this is like actually like not the top, but it's like at least middle or maybe upper middle in terms of usefulness. I think it could be like of things to read, especially if you're running a changeling game. It can definitely give you ideas in all sorts of ways. So both for
yeah,
like plot ideas and characters and kiths and magic and places and
yeah. Something that stood out to me is that fully half of the stories involve a chrysalis and or a reawakening. And I
hmm.
like that both because it's an anthology, each individual story can kind of kick off a hero's journey or what have you, but also in a meta sense, because it is the first book for C20, it's like, okay, the game has been dormant for 15 years, new players are coming in for the
Hmm.
first time and don't maybe necessarily have a handle on that narrative yet.
Yeah.
Here's several examples mixed
Yeah.
in.
It also has a bit of falling to banality too, so the end part, not just the beginning, which is
Yeah. Well, speaking of endings rather than beginnings, shall we move to the other text that we're talking about?
I thought you were going to go a different direction. You can cut
Oh no.
this.
Well,
Speaking of banality.
no. So, a bit strangely, maybe, we are pairing the first Changeling 20th anniversary book with technically the last, which
Yeah.
is Immortal Eyes 4.
And honestly, I had to go check the publishing dates to see it. Although this was probably started earlier. Like,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
writing a novel takes a lot longer than
Yeah.
writing a short story.
So, I believe I went back and kind of looked at the timeline of the Kickstarter, like when they did the monthly announcements and said, here's where we're at with each of the books. It was definitely in the first draft stage before the final C20 core book was released.
Hmm.
So it was a full, I guess, 2.5 years
Yep.
in the writing.
And this is definitely volume 4 of the Immortal Eyes saga, not a C20 novel.
Yes.
Let's just
Well, all right. So as a reminder for anyone who hasn't listened to the Immortal Eyes episode that we did, and I'll post a link to it in the show notes, the Immortal Eyes trilogy was kind of the initial meta plot of Changeling First Edition, or at least it's the cipher for player characters meta plot. In the first three novels from 95 through 97, the Oathmate protagonists go on a journey to find the Eye Stones, four treasures that, when used together, have the power to potentially open a gate to Arcadia. Their journey leads them from San Francisco to Hawaii to Ireland, and from that we got the setting books that were also chronicle books for each of those settings. It wasn't perfect, and it was very 90s, but the novels gave some initial insights into what the world of Changeling was like, especially because it touched on things that were beyond the core book and the initial supplements.
Hmm.
So I still, I have a lot of respect for that original trilogy.
And it also each of them tied into a supplement themselves.
Yeah,
Except for this one, we didn't get one for
well,
this. Although I don't know how you'd write a supplement for this one, but it didn't take us to new places except for anyway.
yeah. Well, so in the Kickstarter, this was the very last stretch goal that was reached.
Yeah.
It was reached by $58.
Yeah.
So Jackie and Nikki, who guided the line for many years, and Jackie wrote the initial trilogy, given the conversation we had for our roundtable last recording, I wonder if this was kind of a late addition to the list of ideas, because I think either Pete or Charlie mentioned how like the stretch goals were being almost come up with on the fly.
Yeah, it went beyond expectations, so they had to keep making new stretch goals, which
Right.
happens a lot.
So it's like emergency call to Jackie and Nikki, like, hey, listen. So it was finally released in November 2019 as the last book, although the Storytellers screen did follow a few months later, technically.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's interesting to have, the first novel was part of the conversation at the very start of the game, and then the fourth novel at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
So, bookends.
Yep.
I have a very brief plot overview that I can go through. Just if anyone doesn't feel compelled to read after we talk about it. So very briefly, Morgan Daniels is the childling Eiluned protagonist in the original trilogy. She's now grown up and she's a cool child psychologist who helps changelings, but she has these prophetic dreams that suggest her long vanished Oathmate friends might return. Meanwhile, in Arcadia, and yes, when I say in Arcadia, I mean in honest to glamour real Arcadia, the Oathmates that enter the trot at the end of Immortal Eyes 3 are hanging out, they're restless, they're feeling called back to Earth, they miss the taste of ceviche, the red cat misses the taste of tires, etc., etc. So they decide to start heading back to Earth. I do not agree with this narrative choice myself because I like Arcadia to stay mysterious, but if you're looking for a semi-canonical representation of that realm, there's one in chapter 2. Or maybe it's chapter 3, I can't remember. Back on Earth, we have Aliera, the now wilder heiress of Duke Aeon, who's still hopping along with his crusty old courtiers. She's being courted by a number of she suitors, much to her chagrin, and simultaneously she's grappling with running things and watching the Duke slowly slip away to banality. Across the rest of Concordia, we have a ragtag group of changelings, Doyle the Knocker, Fiona the Cluricon, Jack October the Redcap, and Wolf Ragnarsson the Aeson. I think there's also one more that I'm forgetting. They're kind of being drawn towards San Francisco for reasons unclear. There's also a mysterious fae named Maharag reminiscing over the murders he's committed in order to free the Fomorians. 8 down, 1 to go. And all parties concerned seem to be after the Cup of Dreams. This is a fabled treasure that, in addition to being listed in the, I think, first and second edition core books as the one thing that can cure the third stage of Bedlam, it's probably also the Holy Grail. It can bring back the dead, unleash Fomorians, fulfill wishes, etc. So it's kind of a combination of, I don't know, epilogue to the original trilogy, bringing in some elements of the C20 setting and a MacGuffin quest rolled together.
It also kind of feels like those movies. I guess if you had the fourth series in what was a popular trilogy that then introduced a whole bunch of new characters that are.
I have a comparison in that regard, and I feel like I shouldn't make it until after we discuss this book.
Okay.
So, thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, tell us some thoughts.
Okay. So, I think Jackie and Nikki are gems and wonderful people and did great things for Changeling the Dreaming.
Mhm.
I did not like this novel. I had a lot of trouble with this novel. It as a novel and it as a part of Changeling, and both of those I had trouble with. And I can get into more detail, but that's the summary of my thoughts. The fact that when you said it was the first draft of this was written before the C20 core book was finished makes a lot more sense now, because
Mm.
one thing I took notes on was not, at least I found some things where I'm like, okay, this is new to C20 in this book. This was changed in C20, but it's not in this book. And this was not in Changeling at all, but is in this book. Like, it's
Yeah.
not like, so I'm like, I think there is some of, maybe they were going based on early notes for
Yeah.
C20 for some things, which explains some of that. But I just didn't like it as a story,
Mhm.
or like, I don't know if I had the same issues with it as you, because like the bit about being in Arcadia I actually didn't mind, but
That is a comparatively minor nitpick on my side. There's
yeah,
a lot of other things that I have to say as well.
yeah. How do we want to do this?
Well, all right. So I want to start by saying affection goes a long way. Like, I
Hmm.
wasn't an OG fan of the initial trilogy or anything, but there's something to be said for bringing back
Hmm.
kind of forgotten signature characters for another round.
Yeah.
Especially in C20, I feel like I don't necessarily need all the same monarchs in place ruling things, but like when Undine the Selkie makes a cameo, or Milshra the
Hmm.
Hidden King, or Ellen the Slua, it's like, oh, okay, that's nice. There's a little cameo. And frankly, the new characters didn't interest me as much as the old
Hmm.
ones. So I was glad to see the old ones kind of pop back
But
up.
the one problem I had though is actually a problem I had with this. We'll get into the C20 core book of everyone's lives seem to be on hold for 20 years. A lot of them, like, it wasn't, maybe
Well, the
like
ones
it.
in Arcadia, certainly.
Yes, but even the other people, it didn't feel like things should have moved forward as much. Like, I feel like changelings generally live lives faster than like I do, but this felt like they live lives slower than me. But
I feel like the she live lives slower.
uh, that
And
is true. A lot of them are she, and then
yeah,
the ones that aren't she still spend a lot of time in freeholds, like that
yeah.
boggin. So that could be it.
Which is a choice. And I don't
Yeah.
know if it's a choice I would want to make, but,
Hmm.
it is a thing.
Yeah, I did realize one thing actually. This taught me how seamings work in C20, because this actually, I was like, wait, this person's been too long and they just became a wilder. And but then I realized in C20, it still had, like, this actually fits the C20 seamings in that it still tends to progress from childling, wilder, grump, but where those ages switch isn't set by your years really.
Yeah. I read it in the context of the initial system because
Mhm.
if you actually add like 20 years to everybody's age, like the Wilders are incredibly petulant.
Mhm.
And like, I don't know. It's,
Yeah, but I mean, there's a bunch of things that are new to C20 in this, like
yeah.
that they have in there.
Or late second edition. I mean, we get the Lost
Hmm.
Houses showing up, and we had never really gotten material on them before.
Yeah, we get ghasts, but they're not like the ghasts in C20 exactly. But you could tell, like, somebody had a note. There's like Thowlane Redcaps. They're called ghasts, and then
Yeah.
ran with it differently in this book than what we got in the.
Well, let's talk a bit about sort of the setting elements because
Hmm.
I think the primary change that I noticed that made it feel more like the C20 setting is that Thalane seemed to be an ever present threat. But they
Yeah.
also get kind of fleshed out. We get notes about almost their culture. And then you also have like the Darkkin kind of harrying people on their journey
Hmm.
back to the Autumn World.
Although the Fearbug really liked sticking people with antlers in this book. I
They
didn't.
did. I mean, if I had antlers, I'd do that too,
Yeah.
probably. There's at least mention of dark glamour. We get
Hmm.
descriptions of the landscape of the dreaming that are taken from dreams and nightmares. We get a Fomorian character who's quite human.
Hmm. I liked that Fomorian though, that take on it, the way they did it, because it would make he's almost a changeling Fomorian
Hmm.
in a sense.
Yeah. There are bits that I like, which are just kind of sui generis. Like there's the Guardians along the Trod and the final sequences.
Yeah.
I liked how the Issue and the Deep Dreaming are kind of narrating the path that they then walk.
It does have that thing you like from Kithbook Slua, because we have Kith reincarnation.
Yeah. Should we spoil that bit.
I don't know. It has Kith reincarnation. We can say that. I don't know if you want to explain more. Yeah.
Okay, spoiler. So we get direct evidence here that at least one instance of a she, namely Liam, who founded House Liam, has reincarnated as a commoner, namely a Cluricon named Liam.
We also get a Skaha she reincarnating as a Pisky.
Yes. Oh, I forgot about that one.
Which also, what? I mean, that doesn't quite fit because the Skaha she would have been, it was a Autumn Skaha.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm curious what the process was for incorporating this stuff because I
Mm-hmm.
assume there was some communication during the writing of this draft, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it maybe speaks to why the anthology was a little bit more abstractly changeling-ish without kind of highlighting the new elements of the setting.
Yeah, they explicitly make a point of second edition Dragon's Ire. Like
Yeah.
that. It does not work like the art. It is second edition Dragon's Ire. And then there's some things here that, were these in before? Because we have oaths. There's no preset oaths. They're just making new oaths all the time when they need a new oath, and they're like crafting oaths on the fly kind of thing.
That was definitely in the original trilogy too, though, I think. And
Okay.
I like
And
that.
the other one is manifesting new voil all
Hmm.
the time. Like, I'm cold. I'm going to spend a bit of magic and make my parka chimerically. What?
Seems reasonable.
Yeah, that was almost feeling like a Exalted the Fair Folk more than.
Yeah. Some of the other things, though, like there's a lot of tell don't show here, which I get it.
Hmm.
I mean, it's book 4 of a series where you have to assume that nobody has read books 1 through 3, but it definitely
Yeah.
takes up a lot of space because
Yeah.
we started off. There's a whole opening section that summarizes the plot of the original trilogy, and then there are chunks within this novel that describe like entire plot arcs over pages, and
Yeah.
structurally I almost wonder if it was written like Dragonlance, where
Mhm.
this was a session or a chronicle that was turned into a book.
Yeah.
So,
If
yeah,
this was a heavy house ruled chronicle that was turned into a
yeah,
book, that would make a lot of sense. Like, there's things though, they go out of their way too far to explain parts of the setting,
yes,
and sometimes those are things that are not in the Changeling the Dreaming setting. Like how chimerical reality works is very different. It was really big on don't kill. I guess
hmm,
they're worried about banality triggers or something, but then they do. Some of them do kill,
yeah.
and the way they do magic, like, didn't really seem like bunks and cantrips and stuff. It seemed different, just in
Well,
general.
and in comparison to the anthology I think can get away with that more because it doesn't do that call out stuff. I
Hmm.
mean, there's so many moments when someone in here is like, "Oh, well, because I'm a she or because I'm a red cap, as you know," and it's like they're narrating a piece of text from the splat write up, and the anthology doesn't do that.
I
So
can't.
it,
I can't read the exact examples, but it's like, oh yeah, because I'm House Aeson, I can do healing magic with plants.
yeah,
What?
sure,
But it's like big deal. Oh no, there's not enough. Too many mortals around. Oh no, there's not enough. It's like they're trying to explain how this house boon works. That I don't think they have that house boon. Yeah.
maybe it's from Book of Glamour.
Oh, okay.
Pour one out.
Yeah.
There's also this trope of like a literary well-read character quoting something and then giving the source from it, which is
Yeah, it's usually
unusual.
Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And once Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, another character.
Yeah.
Actually like the depiction of Arcadia, this perfectly beautiful place that's incredibly boring after a while.
If you're going to depict it at all, fine. I just disagree with the choice to depict it in the first place.
Hmm.
Something else that really bothered me actually. I mean, the characterization varies widely. Some of the characters feel kind
Hmm.
of thin. Others are kind of leaning on the full flesh out that they got in the first 3 books. But something that bugged me was just that a lot of them move past, like, you have these characters who were dire mortal enemies and try to annihilate each other, and then they're like, okay, we're over it for the sake of this MacGuffin quest. So
Yep.
it gets over the narrative hurdle of explaining why people are now working together. But if you have read the first 3 books, you're like, wait, hang on, was it?
And they're kind of repetitive about it. Like, they're like, now we're going to get over together the same way.
Yeah.
My biggest problem, though, is actually with how the plot's resolved, though. I don't know if we need to.
So I guess we have to spoil the ending in order to
Yeah.
talk about that. It's kind of like an extended debate about the right of the Fomorian dream to exist, and then I use the term loosely, battle with a
Yeah.
anticlimactic conclusion.
Well, it's so anti. the cup of dreams just fixes everything, and all the sacrifices everyone made is just like, they keep like right up to the end. You're like, oh, you're making important sacrifices. No, just kidding. Everything's fine. This cup that will help evil people do evil things. It just made everything so nice because it liked her so much, I guess. That, yeah.
It didn't feel earned.
No. In fact, when you keep making this point of all these horrible sacrifices people are making, and in the end you have to choose one thing, right? And you make your one choice, and it's not the one that makes your heart feel better, but it's the one that is best for the world. Oh no, everything's fixed.
Yeah, and then they just kind of go home.
Yeah.
It was more anticlimactic than Snow Crash. I don't know what to make of it. That's what I'm left with.
Mm-hmm.
So when I try to think about what is this useful for, like why I would recommend
Yeah.
somebody read this if they have the time to do so, I think the standouts to me are seeing possibilities for integrating the changes to the world of Changeling with respect to the new houses, the Thalane, and the Darkkin in particular.
Mm.
What I wanted to see more of is how the characters incorporated or interpreted for the Arcadians technology and modernity. Like, if you've been in Arcadia for
Mm-hmm.
25 years, do you even know what a smartphone is?
Yeah.
So, at the same time, though, remembering what was going on in the world at the time that this was written, I can't fault them at all for avoiding talking about it.
I mean, they could have
So,
talked about phones.
yeah, I
That's about
mean,
politics.
but in terms of steering clear of kind of the modern world and everything that it represents, when you consider what's happened between 1997 and 2019, it's like, yeah, maybe we'll just skip over that.
Yeah, especially the bit on because the Kickstarter, they would have started writing it in 2016.
Yeah. I don't know that the novel treads new ground as a novel, especially as one adapted from Changeling compared with the original
Yeah.
trilogy, but I guess it offers some closure if you were after
Yeah.
that.
I'm like, okay, there's some other Changeling books that have more problematic content than this book.
For sure.
But if I wasn't concerned about that, I think I would recommend this last out of anything.
Oh. Well,
But Anthology of Dreams a lot, but this Cup of Dreams,
yeah. But it is last. So,
yeah.
and I for sure read and used this as setting background when I was doing my Selkie book, because
Mm.
that was also meant to be kind of an homage to the original trilogy.
Mhm.
And it's not great literature, and I don't think it has any pretenses about
Yeah.
being great literature.
Yeah, if somebody wants to read it, like they want to read everything in Changeling, I would say, sure, go read this. Like, I'm not gonna, but
Yeah. It is across the board closure, I think,
yeah,
for all parties involved.
with a nice little wrapped up bow at the end.
Yeah. Very, very nicely wrapped bow, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about trilogies that got a fourth book, the text to me, like the finest example,
Mm-hmm.
is Tehenu by Ursula K. Le Guin. So I was a huge fan of the Earthsea trilogy as a kid, devoured the first three books, but then, it was kind of like a cliffhanger ending almost to the third one, and it kind of left a lot of unresolved questions. And Ursula Le Guin herself said, I think the metaphor she used was a chair with three legs. Like, it always felt incomplete to her. And
Mm-hmm.
so she went back and wrote this fourth novel that was set decades after the previous one, the third one, and
Mm-hmm.
focused on completely different characters. Like, the protagonist of the first three novels only kind of shows up near the end and in a particular context. And it had completely different themes. It was a reinvention of the world from a totally new perspective, rather than, all right, let's bring back all the greatest hits and see what everybody's up to.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt different. It was much more adult. It was much more, I don't know, not low fantasy. Like, it was still very much wizards and dragons and things, but it was about fantasy dovetailing with your everyday life in a very changeling-y kind of way.
Yeah.
And that, to me, typifies what you should do when you kind of come back to a series after a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Ursula Le Guin went on to write another novel and more stories within that same world once she had kind of reopened that can of
Mm-hmm.
whatevers. But at the time, it felt like closure, but done so deftly that it's hard not to compare other examples of that.
Yeah,
So
I would compare this. I can compare this to Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull if we're talking
that's
about
another option.
fourth option. Although I actually like that movie not more than most people. So.
I haven't seen the whole thing, so.
But if you're talking about fourth installment of a trilogy,
That might be actually the better connection.
Yeah.
I was reading today about Men in Black International, which I haven't seen, but came out at roughly the same time as this novel and was another fourth in a trilogy.
That does not need to. That was one of those, I like the actors involved. It should have worked and didn't. But anyway,
Consign it to the mists.
Yeah. Actually, it is like this. That is a good analogy. It should have worked.
Yeah. All that being said, this could have been much worse, this novel.
Yeah. I just wish it had been. It could have also been much better, and that's the...
Well, and there's the hype around it too. You're like, oh, here's the original authors and the core developers of the old edition, and like you kind of go into it with so much expectation, and then it was delivered as the stretch goal, the final stretch goal. Yeah.
So it only had 2 authors. It felt... Okay, I have a question. This applies to both books. Mm-hmm. What's a developer for these books as opposed to the editor?
I suppose whoever was passing the draft of C20 back and forth.
Okay, because it was developed by Matthew M. McElroy. But, like, what does the Changeling developer do for a novel? I don't know.
He actually is listed on the last page in the author's special thanks as the editor. So, I don't know what to...
Okay. But then it says the editor is Maria Cambone.
Thanks to Maria Cambone for her astonishing command of the language in editing our work. So maybe Matt McElroy was kind of like the world editor, and then Maria was like the text editor, or something like that.
Yeah, I think he was his White Wolf Wiki fandom blog, which okay.
That bastion of truth.
Yeah, he doesn't list anything Changeling for him. He was a director of publishing at DriveThruRPG, FlamesRising.com. Yeah, I've seen his stuff around.
All right.
Like
well done him for being involved.
One of those, like, in the fandom, got into actually doing work in it.
Oh,
but like,
so may we all. In any case, so is there anything else that we need to say about either of these books? They exist. They're out there.
I would recommend checking out Anthology of Dreams. Doesn't cost that much, and
to be fair, neither does Cup of Dreams.
Yeah, but I would definitely recommend reading C20 Anthology of Dreams.
Yeah, I mean, I will never stop anyone from reading whatever they... Well, no, that's not true. I would stop people from reading certain things. I wouldn't stop anyone from reading either of these.
Yeah, there's nothing morally wrong with Cup of Dreams. That's for sure.
It is what it is, and be prepared for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess that sums it up.
Thus endeth
the books.
Take us out, Josh.
Yeah. So you can find us at changelingthepodcast.com. I should probably mention that you can find us, in theory, anywhere where people listen to podcasts of wide availability. If you have a way you like to listen to podcasts that were not available, please contact us, and we should be able to make it happen. So you can contact us by sending us an email, podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. You could send us a toot for Mastodon, changelingpod@dice.camp. You can definitely talk to us on Discord. Discord.me/CTP. You can also go on our Facebook page for Changeling the Podcast. You can go on our YouTube channel and leave a comment there. We do read them. That's for Changeling the Podcast there. You can also listen to us there through YouTube podcasts, or just watch it on the YouTube.
And all of the links will be provided in the show notes.
Yeah. And once again, I'm Josh.
I'm that character known as Puka.
And remember, if you do forget who you are, you can be brought back through glamour unless you read the C20 corebook.
Or just, take a sip from the Cup of Dreams and cure all your ills.
Yeah, that'll fix everything. Unless you're a bad person.
I cannot live without books. Our own quest for the Cup of Dreams didn't get very far, and so we were forced to make do with the ramekin of wool gathering. Its powers are much less impressive, including things like healing minor paper cuts and bringing wilting flowers back to life. Rigorous kitchen experimentation also showed that if you make creme brulee in this charmed dish, it will be in the top quartile of such cremes you've ever tasted, but a mini cheese souffle will quickly collapse under its weight of idle fancy. One power we do hope to tap into is the Ramekin's ability to draw listeners to our Patreon in the hopes of securing support for the show. If you'd like to help us continue to bring Fae-flavored nonsense to your listening devices, please visit www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast and consider signing up. Particular special thanks go out to our list of folks who have already done so, who include Derek, Dorcadus, Elleris, Hugo the Bog Person, Ia Bull, Jason Vines, Oreo, Raz Caboose, Sandshaker, Sija, Terry Robinson, Triceratops, and Victor Torre. We also appreciate reviews on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience, and do tell your friends and boon companions about us. Go with glamour, and until next time, keep on dreaming.